This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We'd like to welcome everybody back to the Footballers Family Podcast, and I have a special guest. I enjoy reading your stuff. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll go into it. Go ahead and introduce yourself, my friend.
I'm Ken Crippen, founder and lead instructor and podcaster at the Football Learning Academy.
I enjoy your material. I especially enjoy when you put the Titan stuff up there because it lets me vent. And I've needed to vent recently. But you have very interesting stuff, lots of facts, and a lot of good interviews with people. I think I've been part of a couple of them, if I remember correctly. Ben Troop was one of them, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah, you were part of the live Q&A with Ben Troop.
That is it was very nice, and I don't remember who else was with it, but you had a pretty good group, despite me being there. It was a pretty good group. But I'll let you get into it. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we've got a new class at the Football Learning Academy. It's on historical scouting reports, but we kind of try to take it farther than that. This was something that my colleague Matt Reeser and I had started many years ago, where we wanted to take a look at film of older players, especially people that fell into the seniors pool for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we evaluated all that film and put out these scouting reports. And so when I brought it over to the FLA, I added in additional things like biographies, testimonials, honors, statistics, things like that. But another thing that I'm adding to it is videos of players, interviewing them on the techniques that it takes to actually play their particular positions. So, for example, we've got Pro Football Hall of Famer Ron Mix on there. So there's a video with him talking about offensive line play during his era. And over time, we're going to add more and more of these videos to the website so that now you can see not only how to play the position in that era, but how things have changed across multiple eras. So it's a lot of fun putting this together. And like I said, it's going to just constantly expand.
When did he play? I'm trying to remember, but I can't place his time frame.
1960s into the very early 70s. So he was with the Chargers all of the 60s, and then he was with the Raiders in 71.
That's where I remember his name, with the Raiders. He played around the same time as Deacon Jones. I can't imagine blocking during that time just because of the lax rules they had, especially on the Deacon slap type stuff. I mean, the protection they had, it must have been insane. Not only that, if I remember it correctly, interceptions were not that big of a deal back then. So why would you want to protect your quarterback if he's just going to toss the ball and throw? When Jameis Winston got 30 interceptions a couple of years ago, that we thought that was awful. That was a normal year for some of those guys.
Pretty much, yeah. And actually, Ron talks about that in my interview with him. He talks about Deacon's head slap. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser that you got to watch the video to get his answer on that.
I watched that, and I don't know how Deacon didn't break his hand. But of course, those helmets are different than they are now, so that might be part of it.
Yeah, and you're going to have some padding on your, taping up your hands and stuff like that. So that gives a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I would think even with the helmets of those days, smacking those helmets is still going to be pretty painful.
So we talked about a couple of guys at least. I think I might have mentioned another one, but I can't remember. Were you able to look at those people I mentioned? Look at some film?
Yeah, I took a look at you had three of them that you had mentioned. So Jay Cutler, Derrick Henry, and John Elway. So
Okay. Derrick Henry. Now, Ken, this is a common knowledge on this particular channel. I'm not ashamed of it. I own a large collection of Jay Cutler memorabilia. Got two jerseys. I still, if anybody has a Dolphins jersey, I would like you to message me because I don't have that one. I have the first. Well, I've got a lot of stuff. It's a sickness. It really is a sickness. He was a Vanderbilt guy, and that's the only guy that we had that I remember watching. When he was in 2006, when he was drafted, he came out and to me, he should have been the Titans should have picked him up.
Mhm.
And they would have done that if it wasn't for the Rose Bowl game that Vince Young just dominated against Matt Leinart. Now, I remember that game because I fell asleep. I was like, the game's over. I fell asleep. Woke up and I saw Vince Young holding a rose. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I watched the game later on and he dominated that.
Mhm.
And Bud Adams said, we want him because he reminded Bud Adams of Steve McNair so much. The only problem is Steve McNair was worlds better. I mean, just
Mhm.
worlds better. And Vince Young had the talent, but Steve McNair had the drive. And you have the drive and the talent. That goes a long way. But what did you see when you watch film of Cutler?
Well, obviously there are positives and negatives to every player, especially when you get to the NFL level. So, I mean, you look at his arm strength, you look at his accuracy, but the issue that you had is that he relied too much on his arm strength to try to get himself out of situations where he was pressured, and he ended up making bad decisions. A lot of it was because he would stare down one receiver. He had one receiver that was his favorite, and that's where he would try to get the ball regardless. And so he tried forcing things in to try to get to that favorite receiver, and bad things happen when you try to do that, especially if you're on the run. He did have a quick release, which was good. Great ball placement, whether it's short range, mid range, long range. He had excellent ball placement, but the decision making, like I had said, locking down on those receivers. So, when you get to the situation where, you've got that backside pressure, he didn't feel it very well. And so he would struggle. And then locking down on those receivers, he failed to be able to do the proper checkdowns. And so he'd throw a lot of interceptions. He'd get a lot of sacks. I mean, twice he led the league in interceptions. Obviously, that's not a good thing. And a lot of that comes from the bad decision making. So that's the kind of things that I saw. Some footwork issues, ball security issues. Um,
Footwork is a lot is overlooked to me as a plus for a quarterback. You have to have the proper footwork, and I'm not as skilled as you are at doing that, but I've watched. Oh, let's see. Sam Darnold has
mhm,
awful footwork. Baker Mayfield, in a lot of ways, if you look at his throws,
mhm,
they're not that great. He makes up for it. I think his height kind of makes up for it in some ways. Johnny Manziel had terrible. But if you look at it, it's foot placement that if you can do that, your arm motion changes too. It's just interesting how the whole body for a quarterback works together.
mhm,
When I was younger, I didn't know how to throw, and we're going to get to this guy in just a second. I didn't know how to throw a spiral. And I remember one day I was at home and I think they were in Japan. My Broncos at the time were playing the 49ers, and I recorded it and I watched Elway throw a ball. And I went back and watched it over and over again. And I got his motion, but I never got his footwork down. And
mhm,
that to me is just amazing how that Cutler had a couple of problems when I would watch him. My friend and I, we were big Cutler fans. When I started my work where I am now, he came into church wearing a number 6 jersey. I'm like, we're gonna have a good time together. Uh, he had a couple things. Number one, people said that he didn't care. He came from Vanderbilt. He was originally going to be a linebacker because he's built like a linebacker out of Santa Claus, Indiana. And he didn't want to do that. Vanderbilt made him a quarterback. He had to learn quickly that losing was the name of the game for Vanderbilt. And I've grown up a Vanderbilt fan. I don't know what he's talking about. But part of it is he found out he was diabetic and he was wondering why he didn't have the type of energy that he needed to. Found out he was diabetic, which was part of it. But another thing and I know you probably remember this, I think it was the NFC Championship game. I can't remember the year they were playing the Packers. And he got his knee sprained. He got one of his ligaments sprained and sat out the rest of the game. And people were looking at him saying, why aren't you in there? And at the time I was watching, it's like, why aren't you in there? I don't know. I've never had a sprain of that type of ligament before. I don't know how painful that would be, but that's what people remember him by.
mhm. Yeah, and that's the thing is you start getting into the intangibles. And body language says a lot, especially when you are the leader of the team. If you're showing bad body language, if you look like you're defeated, you look like you're not paying attention, you're not part of the game, that wears on the team. They're not going to look at you as a leader. And, that's some of the issues that he faced and, some of the reasons why he was no longer in Chicago.
He, I think somebody said he had a $100 million arm, but he had a $20 body or something like that. I heard that. But growing up, the first player that I remember following is John Elway out of that 83 draft. He was going number one to the Baltimore Colts. Ernie Accorze said we're going to take him because they needed a quarterback. Baltimore was awful from, I would say, from the mid-70s on. They were terrible. Didn't help that their owner was not that great of a guy either. But we all know the story behind that. Elway said, I will not play for, who was the coach at the time?
Frank Cush.
Yeah, Frank Cush. He wouldn't play. Actually, his dad said that. He wouldn't play for Frank Cush. And Elway said, I will play for the New York Yankees. And there's a story that Steinbrenner had a stadium in his office and removed the top of it and had Elway playing, I believe, center field. He said, that's my lineup. Well, of course, they drafts Elway, and Elway said, I'm going to sit out. I'm going to sit out. But there's a reason why he was picked number one. It wasn't because of his Stanford career. If I remember correctly, they had an awful record. There were other reasons why that they picked him. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, they definitely saw him as a prototypical quarterback. So he had little to no weaknesses coming out of college. And, when you watch him in the pros, great body control, great balance, overall great athlete, excellent arm. He can throw on the move. I mean, excellent footwork. I mean, we were talking about that with Cutler. I mean, you watch Elway when he's playing and you don't see him off balance very often.
No.
I mean, he's able to move his feet around and be able to plant his feet in order to be able to throw the ball. And as you mentioned, you got to have that solid base if you want to be able to be accurate with the ball. You want to have strength behind your throws, things like that. You can also tell that he could feel that backside pressure, which is something that Cutler struggled to be able to feel. And so he's able to move around in the pocket. He's able to stay calm. I mean, he's not breaking any Olympic records here with his speed, but he knew how to move around effectively in order to be able to continue the play.
Now, let me ask you this while you're doing that. I hate to interrupt you.
Mhm.
What does it mean? I have an idea, but I would like to hear it from you. Stepping up in the pocket.
Right. So the pocket's going to end up forming around you. So it's going to come back a little bit with the guards, a little farther back with your tackles. And so you've got an area that's open. Well, as those defenders are coming in, they're maybe pushing a tackle in or they're going around your tackle. They're now collapsing that pocket. And so you want to be able to feel that pressure without having to constantly look around. You've got to trust that your offensive linemen are there protecting you, but you can still understand that there is pressure coming from any particular direction. You want to be able to move up. You want to be able to move laterally. You want to be able to move around in that pocket so that you can extend the play. Some quarterbacks that like to run, as soon as they feel any pressure, they're just going to bolt wherever they see an open space. You got the other quarterbacks who aren't known for their running abilities. They're a little slower. So they move around in the pocket in order to be able to extend that play, in order to be able to get the receivers to either come back to the quarterback or to be able to get away from their defenders. And then at that point, they're able to get that ball out of there and to those receivers downfield. If it's something where they still don't see the receivers, breaking away, then at that point they can take off and get whatever yardage they can.
You mentioned being able to fill, and Rick Meyer, you remember him from Notre Dame, I believe is what he came from. Highly drafted. He had a problem looking down, I believe, on the right side. He was so good on the right side that when people would watch tape, they would put their defenders on that side, which would take away his strength. And he couldn't react to that. And I was thinking that when you were mentioning that, some of the quarterbacks, I think, that would look at one read and then run, and they were actually told to do that. Johnny Manziel was probably one of those, but there was one that actually was told that if you can't find your first read, run. But to me, if I spent that much money, like a Michael Vick, if I spent that much money on a guy who is that good, I don't want him running as much. Lamar Jackson, I don't want him running as much. He's good. In fact, I'd say he's top 10, Lamar Jackson is, but if that's my quarterback that I'm about to pay, well, how much did Trevor Lawrence get paid?
50 million a year, something like that.
Oh, yeah, you got that, don't you? You can do that. Um, I don't want them running. Elway, I remember the Super Bowls that he was in. The first Super Bowl I remember was against the Redskins, and that's when I followed football at that point. He could not carry that team. He just couldn't. The 55-10 loss against the 49ers, I believe that was the number. It was terrible. But the Super Bowl 32 against the Packers, he was 36 or 37. He making that run at the end where he gets helicoptered around. That's what I remember him the most for. He's not fast, but he was willing to lay out his body for that. And even hearing him talk now, football players who play 5-6 years, they're going to have body trouble for the rest of life. He played from 83 to 99. Good gracious. I mean, one time they were talking about his arm, his forearm, he got hurt. It said it looked like a Popeye arm, and it never got healed. Elway, it's a testimony to a player that when somebody else is drafted, they say he's Elway-like.
Yeah, I mean, having that linebacker mentality. I mean, you think of Jim Kelly the same way, where he played like a linebacker, where he had no trouble taking on the hits. If he decided to run, he didn't always look to immediately run, but when he had to, he was out there and he was taking on those hits. And so when you're looking at some of these quarterbacks, you were talking before that, they look at one receiver, and if that receiver's not open, they just immediately run. I mean, you want to look at their progressions. You want to look, are they doing, say, a quarter field progression, half field progression, 3/4 full field progression, where they're looking across the entire field in order to check down to their second, third, fourth options. And then, even the running back out in the flat or something like that, you want to make sure that they're looking for those things and not just, as soon as they feel the slightest little bit of pressure, they're pulling it down and they're trying to run. When
When
you do
did
that,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say, when you do something like that, then the defenses are going to know that. Like you said, they're just going to roll over to the right side when you're playing against Rick Meyer, because they know that, okay, he's going to look over there. That's where he's checking down to. And otherwise, he's going to run if he doesn't see anything there.
When did Marvin Harrison, and it has been broken by the wide receiver out of the Saints, but when did Marvin Harrison, it was 143 receptions. When did he do that with Peyton? Was it 90? It was early 2000, wasn't it? I can't
think
remember
so.
the exact date.
I just don't know the year off the top of my head.
I was looking at that and thinking, why did Marvin Harrison get that type of number? Peyton was good. We know that his rookie year, he got destroyed. He was on a terrible team and he got destroyed, but he felt comfortable with one guy. Could that be that his progression just started and ended with Marvin Harrison, or could that be that Marvin Harrison was just that dominant?
I think it could be a combination of both. I mean, Peyton would spread the ball around more than, say, like a Jay Cutler would. But still, I mean, you're going to have your favorites on the team. I mean, you look at Patrick Mahomes, who's his favorite? Travis Kelce.
He's the only one that could catch anything.
Yeah, well, that's true. But, he did have, Tyreek Hill there a few years ago. So he did have decent receivers there that he took advantage of. But yeah, you're going to have those receivers that you really enjoy throwing to, that are going to be clutch receivers. And if you throw it in their general vicinity, they're going to catch it. But, you do need to spread it around, because if you're focusing on that one receiver, then you're just going to double or triple team that guy and you're going to be screwed. So
Michael
Peyton knew
Thomas.
that.
Michael Thomas.
Yeah. So, I mean, Peyton knew that. And so he was able to spread it around while still making sure that his favorite guy got the ball.
I love to have that type of security blanket for Elway, he had a couple of guys early on, but his big one came when they picked up Ed McCaffrey from the Giants, and McCaffrey became his go-to. And then they got Shannon Sharp, and then they got Terrell Davis. Um, that's when I remember Elway becoming more comfortable. He won MVP and had a terrible year compared to now. He won an MVP and had a lot more interceptions than you would think an MVP because he didn't have the receivers. Ed McCaffrey comes in. Rod Smith, they didn't even draft Rod. I mean, they didn't draft him. They got him free agent. They picked up Shannon Sharp. They got Terrell Davis. Their offensive line was better. They had a great defense, and then they won 2 Super Bowls. It's surprising when you give the guy weapons what he can do. That was the same thing with the 99, 2000, 2001 Titans, where they put it together those 3 years. They should have won the Super Bowl against the Rams, and they should have gone the next year, but the Ravens, that's why I can't talk about the Ravens. Tell you a story, Ken. My wife and my daughter went to Baltimore and went to an Orioles game, which I would love to go to Camden Yards. It's beautiful. They took a picture of a Ravens logo and sent it to me and said, "This is for you." It's like, thank you. Still hold 2000 against them. But when you have the team around him, and this is leading into the Derrick Henry discussion, it's amazing what happens when the team just meshes. And that happened just a few years ago for my Titans. I remember when we picked up Henry in the second round, and the people around here were like, why in the world would actually the volunteer fans around here, because they're everywhere, they said, why do we want a Crimson Tide player? And I was like, have you ever watched him play? They had D'Amico Ryans at the time. D'Amico Ryans was not the dominant player he was for the Cowboys and for the Eagles, but he still was good. He still was a running back one lower down, but he's still good. Derrick Henry is a freight train that can run. I was there. In fact, I'm showing you this. I was there when this took place, and it's kind of got a sheen to it. I was in the upper deck when he ran 99 yards to score a touchdown. And I was like, that can't happen. It's about to happen. He face planted 2 or 3 Jaguars into the ground. He came out, and it surprised me that he was a second round pick, but is that because he was a running back?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say that running back, they're not valued as much as other players, say like a quarterback or maybe even a receiver. Um, there were some downsides to him. Obviously, there's tremendous upsides to him. So, I mean, you look at him, he's got speed, he's got strength, he's explosive, he can obviously break through tackles, great vision. He can see the blocking ahead of him and make the cutback to get through the hole. He's essentially a one-cut runner, so he can bounce it to the outside and then one cut and he's going downfield, or you just go straight downfield, whether it's through the center, through the guards or tackles or something like that. So he can go in any direction on the field itself. The issue that you sometimes have with him is that he's not able to have the vision to see the smaller holes or say maybe some of the secondary running lanes that form. And so he'll hit the first one. But if blocking ends up closing up and he's got a smaller hole to get through or something, he could have a little bit of issue with that. He also runs very high. So they talk about you want to have your pads in front of you, and he's not leading with his pads. He's more standing straight up. And when you're 6'3", that, you need to have that lower center of gravity. And so he tries to, instead of making moves on players, he just wants to bowl them over. So you're going to see more of a Jim Brown, Earl Campbell type of run than you are a Barry Sanders kind of run. He's not going to make multiple cuts. He's not going to juke around or any of that kind of stuff. He's just going to try to bowl you over once he starts initiating that contact. So, he does get vertical quickly. He can, like I said, he can run inside and outside. And so I did take a look at some of the statistics when you take a look at his 2,000-yard season, just to kind of see, okay, where did he like to run? So looking at some of the stats, I mean, left and right of the line going outside or to the left and the right side was pretty even as far as the number of carries, but the right side he was far more effective. I mean, almost a yard and a half difference per average, for the average per run on that. So didn't go up the middle as much, but was pretty effective going up the middle.
When I watched him, he needed to kind of get that speed up. So going to the right or left would make more sense than going up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you have if it was a strong side run or a weak side run? Or is that even a thing?
I don't have where the tight end was located to tell you what a strong side.
All right. So the tight ends during the Titans runs were pretty solid during the 2000 run season. With a 2,000-yard season were pretty solid. The wide receivers would block in as well. Sometimes you'll find the wide receivers will be off the line of scrimmage or off from the tight end a pretty good distance. When you would see them run, they would come in and just hit hard. Now they really bought into Vrabel's toughness. You'll see that with the offensive line. The problem with that is the offense. I think Henry did this despite the offensive line, which is ticked me off so much that the Titans had Ryan Tannehill at his best. They had great adequate receivers, and then they had Derrick Henry and the defense that could do certain things, but the offensive line they're just awful. And now even after 2 first-round draft picks, and I think J.C. Latham is going to do fine. People can give him grief. I think he's going to be fine. Even now, after 2 years of first-round draft picks for the offensive line, they're still giving us a D grade. Some of the things I'm looking at, like just give them a chance. Henry, 2 things about him that I enjoyed reading was drafted, I believe, in 2016, around that time. He came out of the Nick Saban running back room, which had Mark Ingram at one point. It had Trent Richardson at one point. We'll get to him in just a second. I think Henry was low on the list and just developed and became a Heisman Trophy winner. So at one point, we had 2 Heisman Trophy winners in the backfield. We had Mariota and we had Henry. He went in the exact opposite direction of a Trent Richardson. Trent Richardson couldn't read an opening if it was right in front of him. You see pictures of him hitting holes that were not there when there was a giant hole in the middle. Henry didn't have that into him until Eddie George said, "Son, we need to talk." And that's actually his words. He said, "We need to talk. Come here. You are bigger than everybody. You're faster than everybody. Why are you tiptoeing around?" Eddie George, during his run at 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, never tiptoed. Well, when Ray Lewis hit him one time, he started tiptoeing a little bit, but anybody would probably do the same thing if Lewis hit him. After that, Henry became the dominant player that I still believe he will be today. I hate that he's a Raven, but I understand that at 30, you kind of don't want to invest a lot into a running back. But now that the Ravens have Henry and Lamar in the backfield, their running total is going to shoot through the roof.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But
when Henry became a receiver out of the backfield, his game, you talk about a baseball player being a five tool baseball player. He became not only a speedster, he didn't fumble much. He did fumble, but he didn't fumble much. But he could receive, he could catch, and then just burn them on the sides. That's when I started thinking that we've got something special here. Not only could he run, but he could catch.
Yeah.
And that was not what he did at the Crimson Tide. That's not what he did.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you on that, is that, you open him up and get him into the open field instead of having to try to burst through holes. I mean, that speed and that strength, you're just going to be stiff arming people down the sideline. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a great way to use them. It also tries to eliminate some of the wear and tear that you're going to have. I mean, you try going up the middle, getting pounded by those linebackers and defensive linemen all the time, that's going to wear you out. And one of the negatives that people usually see coming out of Nick Saban's offense is that he beats the crap out of his running backs. And so people were worried when they drafted him, saying, is he going to be beaten up before he ever gets to the pros? Well, now he's 30 plus years old after all the pounding that he's taken as an NFL running back. It's something that you have to think about is, how much is his body going to be able to last after that pounding that he's had?
Okay, let's say he goes 2 more years, and I wish the best for him. I like Derrick Henry. I do wish the best for him. He's King Henry. I just hate where he is, but it's a business. Okay. Say he puts up 1,000 yards this year, 1,000 yards next year, and retires. He has a 2-year contract, and he fulfills that. Gets 8, 9 touchdowns per year. Is he a Hall of Famer in your opinion?
It's hard to say. I think he's definitely in the conversation. There's no doubt about that. Whether he crosses that hump or not, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm a small hall guy myself, so you really have to be an elite of the elite. Do I put him in the same category as the Jim Browns, the Barry Sanders? You can even look at like an Emmitt Smith or something like that. Is he on that same level? Possibly. I try not to evaluate too many people while they're still playing as far as Hall of Fame candidacy. I want to wait till their career's over, but I think he definitely belongs in the conversation, but I'll wait till after he retires to make a final decision.
With the devaluing of the running back, if you put an emphasis on a running back and he does something for a long period of time, okay, these are not the same players. I know that. Gale Sayers, short period of time, Hall of Famer. Terrell Davis, short period of time, Hall of Famer. The way I see it, of course, I'm not in the same boat of study as you are, but the way I see it, if you hit 3, 4, 5 years of just dominant, you need to at least be considered. For the most part, those two guys I'm thinking have been very short period of time. Even Earl Campbell, he was dominant for a short period of time till his body wore out. And I say short, 6, 7 years. That's short in the NFL world. But to me, the best comparison of a Derrick Henry would be he's a bigger Earl and a faster Earl Campbell. But Earl Campbell left such a legacy for the Oilers that do the Titans view Derrick Henry in the same way? Probably a newer generation does, but for people that remember Earl Campbell, it's going to be him.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely lean Earl Campbell on that, but Derrick Henry definitely has some additional skills that Campbell didn't have. We'll see from the longevity standpoint if Henry's going to stay around, and how long he stays around, how effective he is while he's around. So, I mean, we'll just have to see how the next several years works out for his career.
If you go in, Derek, and I know you're listening, go in wearing the Titans blue, please. Just a fan saying, please do it. Got a couple minutes, Ken. Can you tell us where we can find you here?
Yeah, you can find us on our website at www.football-learning-academy.com. You'll see all of our classes there. You'll see a listing of all the podcast episodes, all of our social media channels, all of that stuff you can find from the website.
It will be on this show notes in just a few minutes. Give us, like I said, we got about a minute left here. In your words, in your own opinion, of all the tape that you watch, what are some of the intangibles and stuff that people don't always notice until they watch tape that makes a player, regardless of position, makes a player valuable to a team?
It really depends on the position itself as to what qualities you want to take a look at. I mean, for example, you've got quarterbacks. You're going to want to see, their leadership capabilities. You're going to want to see how they're able to handle pressure, things like that. If you're looking at receivers, you want to see, okay, what's their skill set as far as being able to read these defenses, make adjustments to these defenses. Same thing with a defensive player. How are you able to handle, say you're a defensive back, how are you able to handle the best receivers that are on the field? Are you a zone? Are you a man-to-man type person? How well do you play compared to your peers? Those are all the types of things that I'm going to look for when I'm evaluating players and ranking them as far as, how does this person stack up versus another person?
I'm glad that you're watching the videos so you can help us through it. Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Ken, for coming on, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And everybody tighten up. Talk to you next time.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.